Cybercrime is a $6 trillion economy. It has surpassed drug trafficking as the #1 crime. The CEO is responsible for cybersecurity and the board are accountable. My name is Paul Dwyer, and for over 30 years I have worked with military, law enforcement and organisations like yours in order to protect digital assets from cyber threat actors. In this briefing, we're going to learn and share all the salient pieces of knowledge you need in order to be able to deliver an appropriate cyber strategy to protect your organisation. The material we're going to reference is an abstract from the Certified Cyber Risk Officer course. We have 10 segments. In the first segment, we're going to look at the cyber risk landscape itself. Then we're going to look at the underground economy of cybercrime, how it actually operates, the different kind of players, the different actors and their various motivations. We'll then delve into what we refer to as the fifth domain, that is to say cyber warfare, nation-state involvement, and we will look at the blurred lines between organised criminal groups and nation-state actors. Then we'll take some time to look at the cyber risk impact from COVID-19 itself and how it has impacted that dynamic cyber risk landscape. Then we're going to uncover the anatomy of a cyber attack. We'll look at what we refer to as the cyber kill chain, the 10 key stages that are involved in an attacker circumventing the controls within an organisation for a successful attack. Then we'll switch gears a little bit and we'll look at how we can develop a cyber strategy specifically for an organisation. We'll look at areas such as CRQ, cyber risk quantification. That is to say, putting metrics, meaningful metrics in relation to the risks identified so that you can make intelligence-led, informed decisions around risk and the residual risk that's been identified in relation to any particular threats. Then we'll delve a little bit deeper again. We'll go into cyber governance and oversight and we'll look at how you can control, monitor and have accountability around all of this area. We'll conclude by looking at the G7 cyber fundamentals. These are the fundamental pieces of advice that have been provided as guidance from the G7, the group of 7 countries, to all financial organizations large and small around the world. And finally, in the shadow of the words of Christine Lagarde, the President of the European Central Bank, we will focus in on those words where Christine Lagarde warned the industry that because of that interconnected and interdependent nature of the financial sector, that a significant cyber attack could cause a liquidity crisis. That contagion or knock-on effect is something we all have to be aware of and we all have to take some responsibility in dealing with that risk. So we're going to focus in on 10 key actions you can take in order to understand and to improve your level of cyber resilience. So let's begin. First, we're going to look at the cyber risk landscape. And in order for us to understand the different threat actors and the different types of groups that we face from a cyber threat perspective, we need to understand the concept that we actually live in 2 different worlds. We live in the real world, that's the real physical world. That's the law with laws, social norms and consequences to crime or when somebody breaks those rules of society. And then we also live in the cyber world, and that's a completely different kind of world. So let me give you an example of this that might illustrate some of the differences. So for example, if I'm a criminal, if I'm a bad actor, and I want to steal something in the real physical world, the first thing I need to get proximity to the asset that I'm going to steal. So I mentioned there the underground economy of cybercrime, so let's look at that in a little bit more detail. Firstly, I want to talk about the dark web. So many of you would have heard about this, but maybe not familiar with exactly what it is. So first I want to talk about the surface web. The surface web is effectively the internet that we all know and enjoy. That's essentially the websites that you can. So I talked a little bit there about geopolitics and so on. So I want to talk a little bit more in depth about that particular subject. So what we're going to talk about now is what we refer to as the fifth domain, cyber warfare, and those blurred lines that exist between criminality and warfare. So what does the fifth domain mean? Well, effectively it was a phrase coined by The Economist magazine when they talked about the fact that warfare now exists in land, sea, air, space, and now cyberspace being the fifth domain of warfare. Now there's lots of debate around whether cyber warfare is something real, whether it's actually happening and so on. But I'll put it this way. If you can demonstratively see that nation states are the cyber risk impact of COVID. So the elephant in the room is COVID and the global pandemic. And let's discuss some of the impacts that that's had in relation to cyber risk. Firstly, we often refer to something like this as a black swan event from a risk perspective, i.e. it's something that we never expected, but therefore it's now something that's become the expected, something's almost normal to us. And a black swan. So now let's look at the cyber kill chain. That's understanding the anatomy of a cyber attack. Firstly, let's consider all the different kinds of threat vectors there are out there. For example, in the most recent NISA Cyber Landscape report, we see that there are a number of these threats listed. And the reality is that many of these. So now let's look at the segment on developing a cyber strategy. So every cyber strategy should be based on the unique cyber DNA of an organization. So what do I mean by that? Well, every organization is different. No two organizations are the same. Their business model may be different, their background. So I touched upon metrics there and residual risk in relation to the cyber strategy. And now in this segment, I'd like to talk about what we call C or Q, cyber risk quantification, meaningful metrics, and how to empower leadership. So one of the challenges that leadership has is in understanding the risk landscape. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about cyber governance and oversight. So how do we empower leaders within the organization? And we've talked about that from the perspective of meaningful metrics, making sure that the cyber strategy is aligned with the business strategy. Because leaders are, they're used to the challenge of making decisions and risk-based decisions, but we need to give them. So now in this segment, we're going to look at understanding the G7 cyber fundamentals for leaders. So where do these come about? Well, first of all, the G7 is a group of 7 countries, and they get together on a regular basis, and they talk about the most important things that they see in the world and how to deal with those challenges and those aspects. So back in around, I think it was 2015, over $100 million was taken from the Bangladesh Central Bank. So in this segment, we're going to look at cyber resilience. And we're going to look in detail at 10 key actions organizations can do in order to increase their cyber resilience. These 10 key actions are based on all of the topics we've talked about thus far, and they reinforce some of the key salient points we've made.